Okay guys, so in this video we're going to be talking about a few different types of chipping and rusting effects that we can use, mainly the chipping with rust and that sort of thing. We're going to be using this old car body here and show you the effects we can get on a car body. Now the effects we're going to be using today, one of them is going to be the worn effects by AK Interactive. Now this is, don't get these mixed up, this is the worn effects, it's not the deep chipping or scratches effects, it's just a worn effect. So if you get the proper chipping fluid, it'll actually chip much better and leave bigger chunks of paint, like take bigger chunks of paint away. This stuff here is a worn effect, it's a bit more controllable, as in not as much paint will come off using this stuff here. So there's a few different types around. Just have a look on their internet sites and just work out which one that you're after, what sort of effect. I'm going to use the hairspray technique. Now the hairspray I'm using is nothing flash, it's just this cheap stuff here, Hair Academy. It's like a $2 tin that I got from one of the local cheap shops. And the other one we're going to be doing is our salt. Now I've just got a bit of coarse salt and a bit of table salt mixed into this bag here. You can't really see it on the video, but we're going to be using the salt chipping effect as well on this car body. I've just wet that, so I didn't realise that salt bag was actually sitting in water over there, so I'll just rub that water off the back of there. Okay, so the first thing we have to do when we're going to be doing chipping effects is, well, obviously rust the car up. Okay, use some of these rust patterns. Now this one here, it's an old car body I've had sitting around for quite a while. And so all I've done with the rust effect, I've just used a sponge and sponged on some different rust colours onto the top here, the same with on the boot at the back here. Nothing flash guys, just some rust colours that I've got here. The ones I got are on acrylics and they're well and truly dry because this was done like weeks ago. So yeah, they're definitely dry. If you're going to use acrylics, make sure they are dry, because if they're still wet when you try these effects, what will happen is that the acrylic underneath will come off as well, and we don't want that. So the first one we're going to have a go at is we're going to do a little bit of our salt chipping. Now we're going to do the salt chipping on the top, on the roof part of this car. So all we need to do is brush some water on up here where we want our salt to be sitting. Now you can spray the water on, you can brush it on, you can do it whatever fashion you like to get the water on there. The spraying and brushing is pretty much the same thing. You're just going to end up with a lot of water over that surface, and that's exactly what we're after, just having that water over there. So now that we've got the water on, we're just going to take a little bit of our salt over here. Now I'm just going to sprinkle this on by hand, just a bit up the middle there. Now you can see there's all different types of grains in this salt. It's not a uniform pattern, it's just, like I say, a bit of a mix of everything. Now I want it on fairly thick up the middle part here, because the effect I'm after, and I want to show you guys, is having like most of the paint missing up the middle part there, where it's really faded in the middle of the roof, and not so much gone on the outsides. So I'm just putting it on a little bit thinner towards the outsides here. Now a lot of this will come off as it dries, and we sort of tip it around and shake it and carry on. So to try and make this stuff in the middle hang on a little bit more, I'm just going to sort of pack it down in there, and the water will actually attach itself to the salt, and as it dries it'll make that stuff in the middle hang on a little bit better. And just a little bit more around the outsides here. Now this effect can be underdone, overdone, you can do it whatever you want. It's going to depend on the particular look that you're after. So we've got our salt on there now. We've obviously got to let that dry for a certain amount of time. And we've got a little bit of water on the back here where I was brushing. Okay, so while that's drying, what we'll do is we'll have a bit of a play with our chipping fluid here, well, our worn effect fluid, which is, like I say, it's the same thing as chipping fluid, just not as nasty, not as harsh sort of thing. Now again, I'm just going to brush this on. You can spray this on, but I'm just going to brush it on, and I'm just going to use the worn fluid on this side of the car, on the back here, and on the other side of the boot. I'll get my hairspray back over here, spray some in the cup off to the side here. So the other side, I'm going to be using the hairspray, and I'll just brush that on like that. Same thing, this can be run through an airbrush, guys, so it's up to you however you want to do it. Now I suggest you get an old car body or an old plane or something like that and just experiment with these things, because you can get different effects of the different ways you do it. You know, if you put more hairspray or less hairspray or whatever, so you can get different effects. So it's just something you have to play around with yourself and work out what sort of effect you're after for each model. So this side here, I'm going to put a bit more of this worn effect on over this side. Okay. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to have to let that dry off a little bit. Now you can let this stuff dry. I wouldn't recommend leaving it for days or anything like that. Try and get this technique done pretty much straight up, but we've got to let that dry. We can't put the paint on over it while it's still wet. So I'm going to let that dry off. I may even put another coat on there while I'm off camera. The salt has to dry before we can go to our next step and putting the overspray and stuff on there. But yeah, the different ways of putting your water on, guys. Like I say, you can brush it on, you can spray it on with an airbrush. Other people just have one of those pump bottles, pump spray bottles. You can spray your water on with that. Like I say, get an old car body, play around with these effects. There's lots of different things you can do with them, and I will go through some of those as we go through. Like one of them that I was just mentioning, putting the heavy salt up the middle, not so much on the outside. As this dries, I'm going to tip the body over and tap it a few times, get a bit of that salt to fall off before we start spraying it. When I do start spraying it, some of that salt will actually spray off as well. But when we come back, when this is dry, we'll go through all those techniques then and give you a much better understanding of how it all works. Okay guys, so we're back with our nice rusty looking car, and all our stuff is dried now. The salt's nice and dry. The fluid on the back here, the worn effects fluid is dried, and the hairspray is dried on this side. Now as you can see, they've left a bit of a sheen to them. That's fine, don't worry about it, because when we go over with this overcoat and then we scruff it back, you're not going to see that sheen effect. It's not going to worry it. The other thing is, when you're putting this stuff on, don't worry about brushing it or if it's uneven if you spray it, because this stuff finishes flat. Okay, even though it looks like that's not flat, it actually is very flat. Just left sheen in some areas. So all I've done off to the side here now is just mixed up just a khaki old blue colour that we're going to use for the overspray, which would have been the main colour of the car originally. So what I'll do first is we'll just give the car a bit of a tap, like so, and you'll see some of that salt breaking away. Now that's going to give us a nice, like, patchy effect. We don't want this to be too uniform, remember, like we were saying before. So I'm just dabbing my finger in there just to soften some of that salt up, to get a little bit more to break away. Okay, and like I say, I want the colour to be a bit more to the outsides and a bit more rusted and gone to the middle. So I'm just manipulating that by, you know, rubbing around my fingers and that. So now the paint I use, Tamiya paint, seems to, these little fellas here, the little Tamiya jars, I use those. They seem to chip off much better. Vallejo paints, I've had a lot of trouble with those. I think it's the bonding agent that's in those is a little bit different. Mr. Colours work okay, but just about any acrylic paint is going to work pretty much fine with this technique. So I'm just going to go over now, and we're just going to start spraying our colour down. Now it doesn't matter that some of the salt will blow away while we're doing this, that's fine. Again, it's going to give us that patchy effect that we're after. We don't want it to be too uniform. Remember, we want it to be patchy and funny looking. Alright, so down in the middle where that's chipped away again, get a bit of paint down in there. Okay, now the other thing you can do while that's like that is actually knock off just some little bit more of your salt in some of the areas. Okay, now what that's going to do now is, when we put this second coat over it, we will have bits that aren't quite as blue. Okay, so the rust is coming through those bits of paint just a little bit more than the stuff on the outside. So again, it breaks up the effect, makes it very... Okay, so that's that, and we're going to wait for that to dry a little bit. So while we are on the back here, on the boot of the car, again, we've got the hairspray on this side. So it's pretty much the same thing. We're just going to build up a couple of little layers of paint, and again, because we want this paint to be faded and it's been sitting out in the sun, we want it to still be a little bit transparent. We don't want to put on a thick, rich coat, okay, because none of the paint should be like that if the car's this beaten up and been in the weather this long. So again, little swirls, make a little bit patchy. We don't want a thick coat, and it's still a little bit transparent there. I can still see bits of rust back through that, which is the look I'm after, and just a little bit more up on that roof there. Okay, and that's going to do it, guys. Okay, and that's going to dry very, very quickly. So I'll turn off our airbrush to kill a bit of that noise. And while that is like that, that paint on the roof, because it's fairly thin, that should be pretty much dried out now. Let's give it a few taps here. Okay, so we're just going to break off some of this salt in here now, like so. Tap that out. I just want to make sure that paint is definitely dry enough that I can handle it without taking everything off. Okay, it is dry enough. It hasn't started coming off completely, which is good. Okay, I'm just going to blow a bit of air on that just to clean it off. And try to paint on the boot a little bit, just with a little bit of air that's left on my airbrush here. Okay, and that should be right now to give this a bit more of a stiff rub and start really bringing that effect to life. Now, our next tool is a toothbrush. Now guys, when you use your toothbrushes on these effects, don't rub it in straight lines backwards and forwards, because what that'll do is start leaving lines and marks in one direction and just look very unnatural. Okay, so nice circular motions, give it a good old stiff rub. That paint should be able to handle that fine now. Okay, and it buffs it all up fairly well as well. It sort of rubs it all around and makes it so it's not quite as hard edged on that salt technique. Okay, it gives you a nice blended look. I'll hold this up to the camera for you a little bit so you can get a really good idea of just how that's come up. Now, how beautiful is that? That is the way it works, guys. That is absolutely beautiful. Now, you can still see there's some salt still left there even after the old toothbrush is rubbed on it, but yeah, you clean it up a little bit, get your tissues and things like that, keep getting a bit more of a rub. Now, the other thing you can do with this effect, which I may show you in a later video if I get time this week, is when you put your water on, put your salt in there, put your overcoat on, and have it so the salt is still a bit moist when you take it off. And the idea is you rub it off, but don't rub it around while it's moist, because you'll just put salt all over everything and it'll just smudge everything. Just sort of rub it off, and where it's wet up in, say, the thick patches here, rub it around like that. And as that salt dries when you rub it, it'll actually leave a salt stain, like a light chalky looking effect. Now, if we had done that on here, we'd have this light chalky looking effect just on the insides of that rust, that deep rust up the middle. And that would actually look even better, because if you look at cars out in the rust, sometimes they do have a bit of a ring effect going on around some of these larger pieces of rust, and it is a good look. I don't always use it, but yeah, I use it sometimes if that's the sort of look I'm after. Okay, so our next step, guys, that stuff on the boot, on the paint on the boot there, we don't want that to dry too much. You want it so it's still fairly workable. It's dry to the touch and all that sort of thing, but don't leave it overnight or anything, otherwise these effects will be a lot harder to work with. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit for you so you can see this when it starts to happen. Okay, so this side here, guys, remember, is the hairspray. So what I'll do first, I'll just go around the lip of the boot, and we'll do that bit first, just to show you this is one of the effects you can use. Okay, so you let the water soak in for a little bit. It'll take a little bit to start doing its work, break through the paint, and it'll get into that hairspray underneath. Okay, so I'll just let that soak there for a second. I'll get my other brush, which is a little bit stiffer. Okay, and you can see where it's already starting to work down around these areas down here, guys, where it's starting to come off now as I rub it with this brush. Okay, if you want it to be random, just dab at it. Don't sort of scrub in one direction. Okay, just sort of dab like that around it, and that's going to leave us a nice random sort of look around that boot lip. Now what I'll do, just grab a tissue, wipe that water away so we can see it a little bit better on the camera. Now that's if you want to do, say, around a panel line like that, like around a boot, around a bonnet or whatever, and you just want to rust those panel lines out like that. That's what you do there. But we're going to go a little bit further, and we want the whole boot to be fairly rusty looking. Okay, so a bit of paint, a bit of water, sorry, just put your water over there. Give a little bit of time to start doing its work. Now you can probably see that's starting to work now. Okay, and the longer it stays on there, the more work it will do. And as that comes through, we'll better get it to stay up there a little bit more. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is the good old stiff brush. Start giving it some nice random swirly sort of dabbing patterns and things like that. Okay, down along the back here where we'll probably have a fair bit chipping off normally on a car, along the back of the boot, like that. Softer brush again, just work that water in. Where the paint has already started chipping away, when you rub more water over it, it's going to soak in underneath that. Okay, so you guys are starting to get the idea of how this works. Now, you can go as long as you like, you can keep going with this, and eventually what will happen is there'll be no paint left. You'll get right back to the rust all over it, if that's what you're after. But in this video, we're not going to go that far. Okay, this stuff up here is a bit more stubborn, because when the hairspray was put on, the hairspray would run down off that slope, so you didn't get as much hairspray. That's what's a bit more stubborn up around that area. Okay, it's a bit more random, so here, some patches down here sort of thing. Okay, I'll give that a wipe. Okay guys, and you can see that effect there. Now don't worry too much about this bit on the side here, because I haven't worried about actually doing that part there. The video is more just on these flat surfaces so we can see how that works. Okay, so that's a hairspray guys. Works beautiful, works a treat for what we're after. This side here is the worn effects from AK. Now it works the same way. Put the water on there, you just give it a little bit of time to start doing its work. Okay, you can see it's actually starting to work already. And the same thing, I'm going to go around the lip of the boot, the outline of the boot here, first up, just so we can get that look of wear around the boot without going around the rest of the boot. Okay, a bit stiffer brush, but I'm just rubbing lightly with it. I don't want to sort of start rubbing away too much. Okay. Okay, and I can feel that paint actually starting to loosen up just underneath this brush as I'm rubbing lightly. You still feel this stuff starting to work. Okay, and you can see where I've gone over these patches here where it was really thick. That's just come off just with that tissue. So that sort of ruined what I was trying to do, show you around the lip, but you can still see that anyway. But because this was wet down here as well, it just came off just with rubbing that tissue. So it gives you the idea. It works exactly the same way as a hairspray on the other side. Now with the worn effect, because this stuff here was fairly thick, it comes off in that big chunk like that. Now if I had been doing it with the brush, I could have controlled that a bit more, but with the worn effect, if you use a little bit less, because I brushed it on here, remember, it was fairly thick. The idea of the worn effect, if you use it on armour and things like that, it doesn't come off in big flakes like that. Normally what it does, I'll just give this a rub down here so I can show you. Okay, so if you see in that area there, right down in here, okay, it's supposed to just wear through, so it looks like just light wear marks where it's sort of rubbing through. We'll try and do it a little bit. You can do it with your finger as well. Give it a bit of a rub like that, okay, and it'll smooth that out, but you can get the idea guys. Absolutely beautiful. This is the sort of stuff we love doing when we're rusting cars and planes and stuff like that. Beautiful effects, the way they work. Now just while I've got you, the other thing you can do with these effects, I'll get a knife to sharpen that up a little bit, is if you sharpen yourself up a toothpick, okay, you can use this stuff to put scratches in, okay, while it's wet like that, some nice scratches, okay, and it will just wear straight through it and leave those beautiful scratch looking marks in there. Okay, so because that's dried a little bit now, it's not going to work quite as well because it's dried. So I'll put a little bit more moisture up here just for now, and we'll show you how that works. Okay, just rub through and it puts a scratch. So the sharper your toothpick is, obviously, and the more that's been moisturised to let it work, it'll just leave a lot finer scratches and stuff. That's great for armour and things like that. Or if you want a car that's been dinged and banged and have scruff and scratch marks, that's another thing you can do. You can flatten your toothpick so it's not quite as sharp, and do like rubbing effects, and it'll do the same sort of thing but just a bit wider and a bit scruffier. But okay guys, that's the demo on our salt chipping and on our fluids here, the AK worn effect. Chipping fluid's the same thing, but the chipping fluid actually worked much easier the way we took those big chunks off. That's what normally chipping fluid does, but because I brushed that on, it was fairly thick there, done the same thing. But down here in this little bit, it showed you what the worn effect is supposed to do. Hairspray technique, beautiful. Same thing, you can just control it depending on how much water you put down, how much hairspray you put on there. If it's nice and thin, it's not going to be as effective. Up on the top here, on the roof, you can see one of my favourite things. I just love it when I do this stuff and it comes up and you just look at that and go, wow, that just is so nice. Obviously guys, you can keep weathering that. You can start putting like rust streaks and stuff down there now. You can actually fade it a bit more, like a bit of dry brushing to fade things. Like if I was doing this car here, I'd start putting rust streaks like running down off the boot and things like that. I'd probably put some lighter patches around the edges of this rust, so it just sort of lightens that up a bit. And it goes on and on. You can get your rust powders and things like that, and your dust powders, and start dusting it up. So yeah, these are just all techniques and tools that we have in our little box of tricks to help us do these sorts of things. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this guys. Any questions, like I say, leave them down below. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed guys, because the videos are going to keep coming at this stage. Thanks very much. Okay guys, welcome back, and this time around we're going to be doing some more chipping effects, and this time here we're going to be doing some chipping effects on a winter whitewash on our armour here, on the grey German armour. Now this is just an old tank I built years ago. It doesn't even go on display anymore. It's a bit of a rough job that I done ages ago. Don't really like it, so we're just going to use it for a bit of experimenting here. So the idea with winter whitewash, I'm sure you all know about winter whitewash in the war. They had a base coloured tank that came out of the factory in a certain colour. When it became winter, a lot of them used to brush over lime or different things over the top of that colour for a camouflage into the snow. Now the problem with brushing lime and stuff like that, or on the rough paint or whatever they could get their hands on, it used to weather really badly. It used to wear off and run off, and it used to leave it very, very sort of broken up and very rough looking. Look, there's different techniques to get that look on these things. I'm going to show you probably the ones that get used the most. Now the ones that get used the most is, well, I definitely use myself. I use the hairspray technique, is very good for this. And I also use chipping fluids, and I'll use worn effects. So this one here guys, what we're going to be doing is, again, the AK interactive worn effects. And again, don't mix that up with the chipping fluid or scratching fluid, they are different. And I'm also going to be using our hairspray, which you may be seen in the other videos, but I'll just quickly show you again. It's just a cheap Hair Academy tin that I bought for $2 from the local cheap shop. Pretty much has the same effect as the worn effects, but just the hairspray will be a little bit more severe. This stuff here is meant to be fairly mild because it's a worn effect, not a chipping fluid. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to use the worn effect. So we'll take our lid off, we'll get our brush. Actually, what I might do guys is use a bigger brush. Now again, this can be sprayed on, and normally that's what I would do, is spray it on. So we're going to do one side around here with the worn effect, the other side we're going to do with the hairspray. Now, the reason I'm not using the airbrush or going for a pump bottle, I just because it is only a demo, it's only going to be give you a quick idea of what we're doing. I don't want to sort of have to be mucking around cleaning my airbrush just to do this. So to give you a good idea, we'll go over a fair bit of it. We'll leave the barrel, the gun barrel, in the grey, because a lot of times they would not paint the barrel. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't, and if they did, it would wear off fairly quick. So mainly just this top of the turret, or the nest, or whatever you want to call this bit at the back here. I will go down on the guards a little bit as well. Just it'll give you a better idea of how this works on everything. It's just the problem is going down the guards, because we've got the tools on there, may not work very well, because we've got to try and get the paint when we put it over around them tools without. So let's keep brushing that on so we get a fair bit of that fluid in the areas that we want it. Okay, that'll do for now. I'll just quickly get that brush a bit of a clean off the side here, and we'll go on to our hairspray. Now, like I say, the hairspray is the same as the fluid. We can put it through an airbrush, there's no problem to put it through an airbrush, it sprays quite nice. Now, the other thing is, guys, whether you brush it on or spray it on, it's going to do pretty much the same thing. And I know you can probably see it, I'm not sure if the camera's picking it up, but as I brush this on, you can see big brush strokes through it, and it looks rather shiny and all that sort of thing. Don't worry about that, because this stuff will, as it dries, it will self-level. And the same with the chipping fluids, they're all the same, they self-level really nice. So you're not going to have to worry about having like all lumps and bumps in your paint and brush marks and all that sort of thing. They will self-level when they dry, which is a really good thing. And I will say that's for the hairspray as well, they all do the same thing. So we have to let this dry now before we can come back and put our overcoat on it. But that's just your first step. So the first thing we do is have your undercolour under there. Normally you wouldn't have this weathered at this stage, you will probably weather it afterwards. Sometimes I do like to do a bit of weathering underneath, so the tank has been used before they whitewashed it, which happen in a lot of circumstances, and so it exposes that weathering when you do this worn and chipping effect on here. So like I say, guys, I'll go off camera now and I'm going to let this dry, and we'll come back when it's dry and we'll show you how this is going to work. Okay guys, we're back with our bit of armour here, and like I say, on this side here we have the worn effects by OK, and on this side we're going to have our hairspray. Now that's fairly well dried now, both those coats, so we're going to our next stage, which is just putting our whitewash over the top. Now all I've got is some Tamiya acrylic paint mixed up in my paint cup here, and I'm just going to lay it on, not thick, just sort of like just little dust coats at first, just start getting it to lighten up and get it to start gripping before we start putting the heavier coats on. Now when you do whitewash, guys, if there is decals on your armour, try and spray around them without painting them, because that's what they used to do. They wouldn't actually paint over their markings. So some up on the top here now. Like I say, we've got AK on one side, our hairspray on the other there. Both should do pretty much the same thing. Put down the sides there. Okay. And we'll go on to this side now. So we're just going to start off with a bit of a dusty coat, just to get the paint down, to start gripping to something. Spray around those decals a little bit. Okay, now it doesn't have to be a nice even white coat, because like I say, this stuff was fairly rough. It was put on out in the field. It wasn't put on, you know, nice and smooth or anything like that. And a lot of times it was just put on with mops or big thick brushes or whatever they had available to them out in the field to do this. So it was never really like a beautiful white glossy paint finish that they were after, or that they'd done. I just spilled a bit of that white paint. I haven't got my cap on my airbrush. That's okay, didn't go on the model, thank goodness. Okay, a bit more around the front here again. Okay, I want to put enough on so that you can see the effect when I start using it, but not too much so that it's just too white, you know what I mean? Again, on the side here, okay, a little bit patchy looking. That's just what we're after. And the back, and a bit more over here. Okay guys, so that pretty much is all I would normally do if I was doing a whitewash looking tank. I don't want it too white, and I don't want it still too dirty and transparent. I want it so you can definitely see the effect when we start using it. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll clean my airbrush while that's drying. When it's drying, we will come back and we'll have some fun doing the chipping part. Okay guys, so we're back and our paint is dried. Now it's only just dried off. You don't want to let this sit too long. If the paint dries too much, it's just much harder to break through the paint and get to the fluid underneath it, the hairspray or the fluid. So this is only just dried off. So what I'm going to do is I'll start off just by putting a bit of water around that guy there and just around these edges like so, because these are the areas that you want this worn effect to take place. Okay, so we're just going to lay that water on around there, a little bit more for around here. Okay, now what it does, it just gives that water time to actually start working. You see that there where I just touched that, and that just came off. That's where the fluid was a bit heavier. Now I can just dab my brush around where that water is actually starting to work. Okay, now you can do this as heavy or light as you like guys. You can do it so it's just nice and fine like that. And this is a fairly soft brush. You can use softer so it doesn't take as much off if you want to. Okay, so you can get that sort of effect there where you're just chipping around the edge of things like that. I'll tip that up so you can see it a little bit better there in the camera. Okay, because it's still a little bit wet, it's a bit hard to see. But that's what we're after guys. I'll just keep going around these edges for you so you can see it all working. Okay. Now you don't have to use a brush with this. You can use, say we'll get a cotton bud now. Cotton bud will do the same thing. Okay, just go around and dab it with your cotton bud. Now again, it depends on what sort of effect that you're after as to what tools you use. Now the other one you can use is a sharp object, say like a toothpick, and you can put like scratches and marks like that in it. Okay, and really sharp sort of chips. Okay, we'll put a scratch across the top of there, one down through there, like that. So you can do different types of effects depending on what you're after. And the camera probably didn't pick up when I've done those scratches, but so I'll do another couple there like that. Okay, that's not the look we would normally be after, but that's just showing you how this stuff works. Okay, and we'll do a little bit more around these edges up here now. As I say, the longer that water's on there, the more it's going to work, the more you rub it, and the more paint is going to come off and go through. Okay. So that's just around the edges at this stage. Okay, a bit more in there. Now what we'll do, actually I might zoom this camera in a little bit for you so you can actually see it a little bit better as I'm doing it. Hopefully this will work. So what I'm going to do now is just put the water over all this stuff in the middle. Okay, and I'll just, while it's actually soaking in, I'll keep rubbing. And you'll see what it does, it sort of leaves a nice random sort of look to where that chipping is actually going on. Okay, so again, depending on what tool you use as to what sort of effect you're going to end up with, you can use a really soft light brush, small brush, and get much finer effects, or you can use a big thick brush and just sort of scrap a lot of it off and just leave chunks around. It's really up to you how you want to do the effect. Okay, so down the side here, we'll do the same thing. Okay, you can just do, if you want to, like that, just a quick effect like that, so only a little bit comes off, and just sort of rub it. The water's starting to do its work, and as it does, all of a sudden you'll see it starting to wear through like that, and you can leave it, so it just leaves just a nice little soft worn effect like that. Or as I say, you can leave it longer and do more. You can see over there where that water's worked more its magic, and that comes off much easier over there now. And along the top here where I just put some water, do some nice little effects up here. Again, you can just sort of wear it through nice and gentle like that to have a nice gentle effect, or really give it a good scrub and just take it right off like that. So it's sort of hard to see the difference between the two. I'll just dab that. Now be careful if you're going to dab water off. Normally you just let it dry, but if you're going to dab it off, just dab it off. Don't rub, because if you rub, that's just going to rub a lot of that paint straight off there, okay? Because that water's really done its work there. Now I'll actually do a little bit on the top here just to show you what I mean. You can see that's just taking more chunks off the top of there. So okay, what we'll do is we'll go to our sides now, and we'll use, I'll show you one of the effects with a bit bigger brush, okay? And we'll start from the top and just go along like that, just so the top's all worn down, brushing downwards. Okay, you can see that's really chunking off there. Okay, now we might clean right around those, around the decals there, because they would have been nice and clean anyway. But as you can see, a bigger brush, more water, and you can see that really coming off. And now this was laid on fairly thick on this side, remember guys, so like I was saying, the thicker you have it, the more that effect's going to work. Okay, so if you wanted an area of the tank that's pretty well used, like say the back hatch there where they've been getting in and out, you could rub most of it off and leave little bits and pieces around. Okay, now again down here we'll just use some dabbing effects, which is another thing you can do. Just dab at it and it will just take off little chunks at a time. Up towards the front here, we'll try and go a little bit more gentle on it. Okay, our water. Okay, again, I'm just rubbing really gentle on this because we don't want a very worn effect. We just want a nice gentle effect up here. Okay, like so. We'll do the same here. Okay, so that's a bit more of a gentle effect. But like I say, it's up to you guys as to what sort of finish you're after, as to what what you're going to do with this stuff. Now you could put the hairspray on much lighter. I put that on fairly thick on that side, hence the way it's coming off in great big chunks. But up the top here it wasn't as thick, and as I showed you up here, you had a bit more control over it. So we'll go over to the other side now. Now this is our worn effects. We'll put some in around the decal here, and we'll just see how quickly that's going to work its magic over here. Okay, I can see that starting to work there now. Okay, so if they were doing this in the field, they'd actually leave a nice bare patch around there, so that's how you can do that, so it doesn't look like overspray over and anything like that. Okay, again we'll go along our top part up here. You can see that bit there where it was wet before. Okay, again we'll just try and do some little bit more subtle effects on this side. Now the worn effects isn't as severe as the hairspray, but again, depending on how thick you put it on too, guys. If you put it on thick, obviously it is going to do the same thing. But and as you can see there, where that's really wet now, that comes off in big chunks like that. Okay, you can soften those out by just dragging the edge down like that. Okay, like so. Okay, go on the top of just a little bit more like so, and start dragging down. Okay, so as we're dragging down, there's still water on that brush, and it's going to start softening the paint up down the sides here, and hopefully you should start seeing it. You can start seeing it there now where it's starting to wear through. Okay, but not too much, just little bits like so, so you can get a really nice subtle sort of look to it. Now down there where it's really wet, as you can see, it comes off. So again, you have a lot of control over this depending on what sort of effect you're after. Just go nice and gentle up here again. Okay, because we know that paint's probably starting to get fairly wet there now, and you know it's going to come off a lot easier, so you just rub much lighter like so. Okay, and you start to get much more lighter effects. You haven't got the big heavy chunks coming off like that. Okay, so that gives you an idea of how you can use that effect, guys. Just ignore the big chunks up. Yeah guys, sorry about that. I just ran out of room on my my SD card that's in here, but because I've pretty much gone over this like while the camera was off, it's just to show you like this side here. You still see that's actually still coming off, it's a little bit wet up there, but that's just showing you that really nice, really worn effect that you can get. Like, you know, you wet it right up, you can get it to be as heavy or light as you like it, sort of thing. Up the top here we showed you more of a, you know, definition around plates and things like that. On this side here we showed you with the hairspray, when the hairspray was on fairly thick, where you can take it off just in big sheets and leave bits of, you know, bits behind. Now all these techniques, and the same with where can we show you on the nose here, up in here we can show you like we've just sort of faded through that white a little bit. So these are all different techniques you can use with the same, like the same technique with different results depending on how you use them. You know, smaller brush, much wetter, things like that. You can put it on your chipping fluids and your hairspray much thicker to get more effects. You can put on less paint, attack the paint while it's still wet. There's all different variations in this depending on what sort of look you want. But hopefully this gives you an idea of all the different types of things you can do with these techniques. Now there is other techniques that we do use on armour, like this is not the end of it. Normally after this we would start going through now and putting streaking effects and things like that, and some of it would be your green colours and your light blues and greys and a bit more white and stuff like that, and quite a few little rust streaks and things like that, and it will actually tone this right down, this big chunky chipped off effect. The other thing you can do on armour, if you do it with a really light brush, like a fairly fine one, and cut the bristles back so it's just like a little stabby one, you can actually go around rivet detail and just knock off the tops off the rivets. You can do, it hasn't really worked up here, I can't find them now. Yeah, there's a couple of little bumps along the front here. I didn't actually do them, but what you can do is you could dry brush over those. Like if you've got a fine enough brush with stiff bristles, you can just wet the tops of those and just dry brush over it, and just knocks that white paint off there. But hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea, guys, of what that technique is capable of achieving. And like I say, that's not the finished product. You can do a lot more work on your armour, but that's just another tool for you guys to put in your box, something else you can use. The other thing I didn't get a chance to show you while this was all still wet, down the sides here you can put, especially on armour, a lot of this would be scratched off, and you can do scratch effects through this quite easy. But just with scratching effects like this, make sure you do keep them random. If you're just going to do stripe, 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 stripe like that, it's just not going to look, look realistic, because it's just not, it's too uniform sort of thing. So make them fairly random. Use a really sharp toothpick, and while that was still wet, it would work much easier, obviously. But well, there you go, guys. I really hope you enjoyed these videos on these chipping techniques. Obviously there's lots of variations in it and things that you can experiment with. Get yourself an old tank hull, an old car shell, and get yourself an old airframe and just play with these techniques. It doesn't cost a lot, the materials aren't expensive, all it costs you is your time. Just keep playing with them, and yeah, and you will get there. Okay, thanks a lot for watching, guys. Make sure you sub below and leave some comments, anything else you'd like me to do, any other tips, anything you think I've done wrong or whatever, just let me know in the comments below, guys. Thanks for watching. Okay guys, welcome back, and this time around we're going to be doing some chipping effects with a sponge, and also chipping effects with a fine brush, and this little Tamiya fella here. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I've just got this old tank here that we're going to have a play with, and all the colour I'm using with both the brush and the sponge at this stage is just the AK Interactive, this fella here. It's the acrylic chipping colour. I'll get around where it's got the label on it, there down the bottom there, chipping colour. Okay, so it's just like a rusty brown looking colour, fairly dark. So I'll just put a little bit of that in my paint tray over the back here. And all I'm going to do is I'll bring this around so you can see while I dip it in there. Okay, even though that's a little bit out of focus, and sorry this camera's not real flash, but I want to keep it in fairly close. Now, you dip it into your paint, and once it's been dipped in there, just dab off the excess, because you don't want too much of this on there when you start chipping with it, because if you do, it'll just actually ruin the effect. Now you squeeze your sponge up, okay, like so, just so it's not, and just to forgive my nails, I've been playing with this paint for a while now, and all I'm going to do is go along one of these edges here. I'll get this to focus in for you a little bit, like so. Okay, so I'm just going to go along this front edge here, okay, and it's just going to be lightly just dabbing along the edge, okay, and don't go square onto the edge. You can go a little bit over the top and go inwards a little bit, in towards the tank a little bit. It makes it a little bit more random, so it doesn't look too uniform the same. Go down to the sides a little bit in places, not all the way along, just in a few spots, so it doesn't look too random. Now I'll get this to focus on that area for you so you can get an idea. You can sort of see how that's worked there. It's a very nice effect. Works very well on armour. You can do it on car models and that as well. Just use your imagination, guys. It's just another tool that's in your box. And the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to do some chipping with a brush. Now with the brush, you have to have the right consistency on your paint, and you need to have a really fine brush to do this. Don't try and do this with a thick brush, as fine as you can get it, because it is a bit of a thing amongst armour modelers who say that chipping on tanks, it never looks realistic. It's either overdone or underdone or whatever. It's one of those things. But again, it's creative license, guys. You do it the way you want to do it. So what I might do, I might go up onto this top part here at the start of our barrel, and it's just, again, it's just along the edges, again random, just little patterns. We'll do a little bit up here, on the edges up here as well. Okay, around the front. Okay, now the idea, like I say, this has got to be random, and you may have to go back over it a couple of times to get that to work. I'll get this camera to focus on there. You can see that chipping effect along that edge, and just a little bit up along the top there. So that's the sort of thing we're after with using the brush. Now I'll do a little bit more down around the front here. We'll get this to focus for you, just down along here. Now because I'm holding this at an awkward angle, and forgive me if this goes a little bit astray, but just lightly run your brush along. There's nothing hard about it. It's just trying to keep it random. Remember, try and keep this random. Don't do it too uniform. Like, don't just drag your brush along in one pattern. Okay, so I'll do a little bit around the sides here. I'll do a little bit down here, like so. Okay, then we'll get this to focus again for you. If we can get it to focus in the right area there, so you can sort of see that effect we've got. Just forgive some of the other old paint on here, guys. It's from it's an old hull I use just to muck around with. But what I'll do, I'll do some snapshots a bit later on of this effect, so you get a better idea of how it actually comes out. I'll just have one more go for you on this camera. I have got another camera on order, so just forgive the camera work at this stage. This is all I have at the moment, so again, nice and random like that. A little bit up here. It's really hard to try and get this to focus where I want it, so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, just along there like so. Up here. Okay. So again, we'll get that to focus in the right area. This is a terrible camera. It's actually a still camera that's got on. I'm using the video part of it, but you can see that there, how that's worked. That chipping along there. Okay, now you can mix the different types of chipping. Where we done our sponge chipping. I'll see if I can get this somewhere where the light should work a bit better for us. Okay, so you can see your sponge, where we've done our sponge chipping down here in this area. Okay, and it's the same thing. You can do this, go over it with the brush, make it a little bit more harsh in places. But the other thing you can do is start mixing your colours up. So I'm just going to put another lighter colour in a paint pot here. A little bit of water, not too much. And we'll actually change the colour of the paint, and we'll go over these same areas. We'll start with the sponge effect area first, down here. Okay, and we'll just put a few little dabs of the different colour down in there. Okay. And the same up here, we'll just go into a couple of little spots where it's just fresh. Like so. Now, we'll see if we can get this to focus again for you. And there we go, you can see where it's got the fresh rust on there as well now. Now the colour I've chosen there is a little bit bright, but it does give you a bit of an idea of what can be achieved. Like I say guys, it's one of those techniques, it's a little bit controversial. People say that it doesn't look real and things like that. But again, like I always say, it's artistic license, guys. It's what you like. So what I'll do is we'll go to another colour and we'll mix a couple up, and I'll just show you the sponge technique again with another colour mixed in, so that we've got a bit of a mix of colours now. Just give me a second just to get these mixed in, guys, so we can lighten that colour down a little bit, so you can definitely see the difference in the colours. And I probably should have actually done this with the orange before to try and dull the orange down a bit, because it's a little bit bright, that colour I chose, but it was just so you could see. Okay, so we've got a nice little colour mixed up over here now, and I'm just going to use my sponge. I'll just tear it off a little bit so it's a bit more random. Dip it, and we'll dry most of it off again. Pinch it up with my fingers the way I want it. Okay, so that same area where we've chipped along here, I'm just going to go along with this other colour now and just overplay it a little bit. Okay, and there's a bit up the back here, get that to focus, same thing, different colours over there. Now what that does, it breaks up that colour, so you haven't just got the one uniform colour on there. Now, like I say, that's a bit of a bright orange that I've used on there, but that's just so you can see how that works. So you've got the other colours on there. Like I say, I'll take some still shots to show you, a bit more realistically when you haven't got such a dark colour mixed in with it. And I'll just grab another quick colour here as well, so we can get another colour happening over the top. Now this one's darker again, and we'll get that to focus back where we want it. Okay, just another bit of a colour. Now I'll just show you what happens when you overdo this effect, guys. So if you dab it on too hard, like so, that just overdoes that effect then. Okay, it just turns it into like a smudgy looking paint pattern. So that's definitely not what we're after, is that sort of look. We're after something random. So again, we'll pick another panel here somewhere, A lot of this tank's already been done. Okay, we'll go along the back edge of the turret here. Get this to focus for us. Okay, along here. Just chipped over. And we'll go over the top a little bit. There's not a lot of paint on that, but again, I don't want to overdo this. Mix it with a bit of the dark colour as well. Okay, just dab it on there. And again, just fairly random, guys. You don't want this technique to be uniform like any of the techniques we do. Don't try and keep it so it's random, not too uniform. Okay, because if it's uniform, that will really ruin the effect. You can see on the back of that toolbox there now, that chipping, how that's come up on there. Okay, so again, like I was saying, you can mix your colours, put some brighter colours over the top of it, just to mix your colours in a little bit. I'll just put a little bit over there now. I haven't really dried the sponge off very well, but that gives you the idea of what I'm talking about. Just mixing your colours up. Like I say, you don't have to go too bright like that. But again, if you make a mistake and a colour is too bright, you can always go back over it and dull it back down again. But like that, and that makes it look a little bit more realistic. Now that's dulled it back down again. Okay, so again, it's one of those techniques. Like I say, it's very controversial. Some people like using it, some people don't. It depends on your taste and what sort of effect you're after. Okay guys, so this time around I'm going to show you some more chipping with the paintbrush, just a different technique. Now this is one of those ones that's fairly controversial. Some people say it looks real, other people say it's just too out of scale. But it's just to show you a technique that you can use. Now this is mainly done for scratches and stuff like that, so all I've got is a fairly light colour on this really fine brush here, and I'm just going to water it right down, because if you have it water, you have more control over your colour, and it stops it from being too bright. Okay, so all we're going to do is do some random like splotches like that, scratch marks around the edges here like that, a little bit around these hinges, okay, a little bit here, around the back, up here. Okay, now what this is just putting the light colour down, and we're going to put a rust colour in the middle of this white. Now what that'll do is give the chips like a 3D look to them. Okay, so these, don't look at this and go, oh no, that's ruined, that's just not right. This is only the first step of this to show you how it works. Okay, like that, and that should be enough to give us an idea. Now I'll just clean my brush off. Okay, now the next part that we are after is the actual rust colour. Now I've got a little bit of my chipping colour here. All it is just the AK chipping colour. Okay, that's all we're going to use. I need a really small amount, just a dot, and again, fine brush, guys. If you've got a fine brush, just makes this so much easier. Just thin your paint down a little bit. Now the idea is to get this into either the sides or into the middle of the light colour that you've put down there. Now you don't want to try and rub that white colour out, you just want to put this rust colour in the middle of those white specks. Okay, and let's say really fine brush, get some magnifying glasses to make this, sorry I just bumped the camera, to make this effect work properly you have to have that fine brush, otherwise you're just not going to get what you're after, the look you're after there. Okay, so let's finish off this couple last dots here. Okay, it's very, very arty-farty, it's very, very fine work, but as this dries, I think that's about it. Okay, as that dries, I'll just clean my brush quickly, guys. Now, when that dries, you'll see, I'll get this to focus up fairly close if we can. Okay. Okay, you can sort of see that effect on there. Okay, now the light colour I use is very light. Normally you have the same colour as that your base coat is, and you just put a bit of white with it to lighten it down. I've done it with that really light colour just so you can really see how that works, that effect. But you can see what I mean, it makes the chips three-dimensional, but again it looks a little bit out of scale because the brush isn't the finest brush I've got, and it's also, you know, so you guys can see if you do it too fine it's too hard to pick up on this camera. But that gives you the idea of doing those 3D chips, and you know, you can mix and match these. That's just another tool that you have in your box there, your box of techniques that you can use when you're doing armour, cars, whatever you want. Like you can see, that white really stands out because it's just, you know, very light. Like I say, I wanted to use that white so we could really pick up on this camera how that works. But you get the idea of that effect and what we're after. But it is a very good effect, guys. Use it in moderation, don't go overboard with it. It's good to do if you've got big deep gouges, you know, like on side armour or up guards or things like that. That's a great technique for that because it gives it that, like I say, that 3D sort of effect, gives it depth to those chips and scratches and stuff like that, especially if they're fresh because you've got the fresh paint around the outsides of it. But yeah, guys, use it as you will, and like I say, it's artistic license. It's up to you. Some people don't like it, some people do. It's one of the techniques I use, but very randomly. Okay guys, we'll see you in the next video.